This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
We've talked about the expected thing that the Cleveland Browns could do at the number 6 pick, which is maybe Monroe Freeling, maybe Carnell Tate. Those have been the two names that have metastasized around the conversation of what the Browns are going to do early. There's also the idea that we've talked about a ton on here that the Browns could trade back from 7 to 13 and still try to get one of those two guys in addition to getting some extra picks down the line. But what are some other options that the Browns could go at 6 that maybe aren't being talked about as much, but could definitely be viable for the Cleveland Browns? Let's start with the first name. And this is the one that my gut tells me not to rule out, even though my brain wants me to rule out, because logically it does not make as much sense as I would typically think that the draft picks for Andrew Berry would, but there's something about how the Browns have talked about their offensive linemen that make me not rule it out. And it's Francis Malnoa at 6, if he's there at 6, right? That's still the question. Will Francis Malnoa be there at 6? And would the Browns not take Francis Malnoa if he's there at 6? The reason I think that the Browns could take him, one, if we look at Andrew Berry's history, right? He loves those young guys. Francis Malnoa is plenty in that range of young, right? I think he's 21 or younger than 21. We also look at what the Browns are trying to do, and we look at the skill set of Francis Malnoa just as a tackle, and he's somebody who can run block really well and kind of set that physical tone for a football team, right? And if that's what the Browns are going for, I could see how somebody like Malnoa could be a lot more attractive to the Cleveland Browns than a Monroe Freeling. Even though Monroe plays left tackle, even though Monroe's pretty good at the pass protecting stuff, the one area where Monroe's not going to deliver early on, you would expect, is not physicality. He's plenty physical in the run game, but a crisp run blocking ability out the box. You're going to have to develop that with him, right? And if we're just talking about who's the better player, Francis Malnoa is the better player than Monroe Freeling. The thing that stops this logic from being what people are guessing from the Browns is the simple fact that Malnoa is either a right guard or a right tackle. And Monroe Freeling is almost certainly going to play left tackle in the NFL. Right. And he does have the upside to be a really, really good left tackle in the NFL. So Malnoa, he's a name that I would have thought after they traded for Titus Howard, I would have erased him off the board. But I just can't get myself to do it because something tells me that they like Malnoa. And that the way that Andrew talks about these offensive linemen, where he's like, hey, I could flip somebody. Guys have played right tackle their whole college career. You flip them in the pros, they end up being fine. The fact that he drafted Jed Wills, who was a right tackle, flipped him to left tackle, right? I don't know if he's as married to the right tackle, left tackle paradigm, even though I would have serious questions about if Malnoa could play on the left side, given the fact that Miami let Markel Bell play on the left side that whole time, right? Maybe that was what made sense for them. And it's not reflective of Francis Malnoa's ability to play the position. But I would assume if Malnoa was capable of playing on that left side, they would have put him there. But Andrew does make a point in his owners meeting press conference. If you haven't watched that, go check that out. Where he says, hey, man, sometimes, the job description for a right tackle and a left tackle are the exact same these days. So it might just be that Malnoa's natural at right tackle, and since the job description is not that different, they just kept him at right tackle there at Miami. And if that's the case, I can see the Browns being a lot more interested in Malnoa. There's just something about him that tells me I can't ignore him possibly being the selection there at number 6. And honestly, I wouldn't hate it. I would be very curious to see how they line that up. That wouldn't be as seamless of okay, you get Monroe Freeling. I know exactly where he lines up. We could slide in the rest of these pieces. But if you do get Malnoa, like I think he can be a high level run blocker at some position on your offensive line. And if that's what you're prioritizing, I don't blame you, especially when you're this early in your rebuild like Cleveland is. The second player that I think is a sleeper at the number 6 overall selection is Ruben Bane. Ruben Bane. Now, this one will set the rumor mills spiraling, right, about the Myles Garrett trades. People will talk all camp about Myles Garrett possibly being traded, and then we'll get to the trade deadline, and it's going to heat up again. You'll never hear the end of Myles Garrett possibly being traded if the Browns take Ruben Bane at 6. But Ruben Bane could possibly just be the best overall prospect to take at number 6 at the best possible position, right? Caleb Downs is another strong prospect. I got him an honorable mention simply because I'll talk about that in a second. I don't want to talk about that and kind of take the shine off Ruben Bane here. But I think if you're looking at the best prospect that could be available or is projected to be available at 6 at the position that is at the highest premium, Ruben Bane fits that description. I mean, this is somebody who has tremendous bend as a pass rusher, not the greatest length or measurables, but look at the production in college. Look how good he was. Look how much of a game wrecker he was. High level player in important games as well. So you could say to yourself, if you're Cleveland, Myles is getting up there. You know, we want to have a younger edge, either support Myles as he gets older, or if we make the move to get off of Myles, we're not completely starting from zero like we would if we traded Myles Garrett today. So that could be something that the Browns could be interested in. I think if they do take a defensive player at 6, it's going to be an edge. And if they take an edge at 6, I think it's going to be Ruben Bane. Again, the Browns tend to like younger prospects who demonstrate the ability to dominate their competition at a younger age because that's more suggestive of a player who's going to be an outlier in the NFL, right? If you're 25 and you're having great success in college, then your age kind of puts you at an advantage, right? David Bailey, I think, is like 23, and he had a lot of success in college. But if you're like 21 or 20 and you're having success in college, especially these days with how much older the pool is, then that suggested that, hey, you're a special player and you're a special talent. Think about Harold Fannin, right? 20 years old, he goes to the NFL, and look how productive he was as a tight end. The Browns tend to like that with their more premium picks. Ruben Bane fits that age criteria, similarly to Francis Malnoa. And similar to Francis Malnoa, you can make the argument that, hey, that's just the best player you can get at the best position you could select. And if the Browns end up in a situation where they're not in love with Monroe Freeling, they're not in love with any of the wide receivers, they can't find a trade back, then I think Ruben Bane might be there. Okay, we got to pick somebody here. We're going to pick somebody we think is worth this selection and not reach. We're going to go Ruben Bane. You know, I would not be shocked if that's where the Browns went. Do I think he's the greatest fit for what the Browns do right now on paper? No, but do I trust that the Browns would find a way to make him fit a lot easier and more naturally than what not what other defensive coordinators have been able to do, but I don't think they're just going to leave him out there and force him to be something he's not. I think they'll find a way to incorporate him to the defense. So Ruben Bane, I think, is the one selection they could do on defense. Let me jump to my honorable mentions before I get to my last two. Caleb Downs is an honorable mention here. I think there is a bit of a deal of dissonance between what fans think of Caleb Downs as a prospect and what the NFL thinks. You hear the word generational get thrown around with Caleb Downs, and I think people feel like in the NFL that Caleb Downs is a really good prospect. I don't think they feel like he's a generational prospect, right? I don't think they feel like he comes up to the realm of a Jamal Adams coming out of college. Now, I think Caleb Downs will have a better career than Jamal Adams. But if you look at how hyped Jamal Adams was coming out of college, I don't think that they feel that way about Caleb Downs. I think Caleb Downs is actually an example of a high floor player. And that's kind of how teams view him. They don't know how high his ceiling is. They think his ceiling might be limited because he's not a plus level athlete at the position. But they do think that he's really smart and he has great instincts and that he's going to be a solid player, a Pro Bowl caliber player if you draft him. High floor, they don't know what the ceiling is. I think if the Browns take somebody at 6, they want to take a premium position, and they also want to take somebody they feel like has a bit higher potential than like maybe what Caleb Downs' impact at safety could be. You could say if Ruben Baines and Caleb Downs are the same level of prospect, which I think is fair. Ruben Baines' position gives him the advantage because he's just closer to the football and able to impact more plays. So that's kind of why I don't have Caleb Downs here. I don't think the Browns will take him. Ty Simpson is also here, honorable mention. People have him slotted here because he plays quarterback, but let's be real here. If you're going to take a quarterback in the first round, there's a level of motion that you have to have around that quarterback in order for it to make sense, right? And the Browns have not demonstrated to have any of that motion around Ty Simpson. And what I mean by that is you would expect a heavy presence at his pro day. You would expect a lot of smoke about Ty Simpson coming on visits. You would expect there to be a lot of feelers being put out on Ty Simpson, right? You know, it's almost like if you're going to ask somebody to get married, like you got to do a lot of groundwork in most cases. You got to ask the person's parents about, you know, how, if that's okay. You got to communicate with some siblings about what certain things should look like. There's a lot of work that goes in to engage, asking somebody to marry you that indicates that that's where things are going. It doesn't usually come out the blue, and it's not necessarily like the greatest indicator of something that's going to be like successful if it comes out the blue, in my opinion. But if you look at the Browns and how they've been moving around Ty Simpson, there's been none of that. Right. And I understand the Browns are secretive. They're not going to put their cards out there. But if they wanted to draft the quarterback, they would be moving like they wanted to draft the quarterback that early. I don't think they're moving like they want to draft the quarterback that early. So my read is that they don't feel that way about Ty Simpson. All right. The next player that I think will be a sleeper for the Browns to take at number 6, now that we're done with our honorable mention, this is pretty obvious to me. Mekhi Lemon or Jordan Tyson. I don't know if this is just locally or if this is kind of indicative of what's going on nationally, but for whatever reason, these two have been kind of pushed out of the conversation at 6 for Cleveland at wide receiver, and I don't really understand that. I think if we look at fit, Jordan Tyson is more of what the Browns are looking for. Mekhi Lemon, fit-wise, is more of what the Browns are looking for. And as much as I like Carnell Tate, I don't think he's at a different place prospect-wise than those two. I think they're all kind of in the same place prospect-wise. I understand Mekhi Lemon didn't have the greatest interviews at the Combine. I don't really care about that at the wide receiver position. There's other positions where your interviews matter more because they're leadership positions, right? Quarterback is one of them. Linebacker is another one, right? Positions where you're expected to be kind of a quasi-coach. Wide receiver is just simply not one of those positions where I care about that sort of thing. I just care about if you could be productive at wide receiver, right? Like you're not going to have the wide receiver leading the team. That's not something that usually happens. So you really care about production. To get production, you need a fit. I can easily see where Mekhi Lemon can fit into this offense. I can easily see where Tyson can fit into this offense. With Carnell Tate, like there's a bit of squinting required because you just didn't see Carnell do some of the stuff that the Browns want their wide receiver to do, that they draft that early. And you want to consider that if the Browns are taking a wide receiver at 6, that's somebody that they want to be able to throw the ball to or be an easy button for their quarterback, right? And that requires like being able to just take some low level of difficulty throws and make more production out of them than what's necessary. And you haven't, that's the one big flaw in Carnell Tate's game, is that you just haven't seen him take a bunch of short passes and get a ton of yak, right? He's normally somebody who gets the ball. He's a home run threat downfield. But that's not something that the Browns really are in like a much of a need for. Like you can look at the Browns roster right now and you look at Cedric Tillman, who could do that when he's healthy. And then you also have Isaiah Bond, who's also another home run hitter. The Browns have that They need somebody who can consistently like get first downs and carry the offense through. And, you know, because of the situation Cardell Tate's in, you don't really know if he can do that. You might be confident that he could do that, but we don't really know. But we've seen Mekhi Lemon do that. We've seen Jordan Tyson do that. I just don't think it makes sense that they've been pushed out that conversation. I understand that Lemon's not the greatest athlete in the world, but you can watch Mekhi Lemon and see a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has similar measurables, similar athletic concerns to Mekhi Lemon and is an elite wide receiver in today's game. With Jordan Tyson, all the tools are there. All the tape is there for Tyson. It's just a question of can he stay healthy or not. And the reality is there's been a bunch of guys who had health issues in college and then got over them in the pros. And a lot of guys who did not have health issues in college who had a ton of health issues in the pros. So I don't know if that's something that you want to strictly draft by, because that can bite you in the ass. I like Carnell Tate as a prospect, but I don't get why Carnell Tate has pushed out those other two names, because I think those two names are probably a little bit more intriguing fit-wise for the Cleveland Browns than Carnell Tate. That being said, let's get to our fourth option that could happen at 6, is that the Browns trade back, but all the way back to the 20s, right? It could be that the Browns just don't see much of a difference between the talent that's available at 6 to them, depending on how the board lays out, and what's available in the 20s. And they'd rather recoup a ton of value by moving all the way back to the 20s in order to kind of balance out what they think is possible with this draft. Think about it like this, right? If the Browns think to themselves, we're not overwhelmed by the opportunity to get some of the players available to them at 6. And they think that, you know, Denzel Boston is a step below what they can get at wide receiver at 6, but maybe they can get an extra first from next year and then an extra second this year for moving back to 20. They could say to themselves, well, the difference can be made up and then some with that extra first and with that extra second from the talent gap between a Monroe Freeling and a Blake Miller or a Max and an Anchor or something like that, right? I think that could be some of the thinking. Maybe the Browns trade back much further than we're anticipating here, and that's a possibility as well. But these are the things that's just been rumbling around my head that I've been thinking might be possible for the Cleveland Browns. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.